Tonight on our agenda, we have an EOTC meeting prep meeting, and then Carbon Council goal, update on fleet electrification, and a little time for council board reports and council updates. We do have a special meeting called for 5 p.m. as well. With that, let's get right into it, and Dave Pesnicek is here to get us prepped for the meeting next Thursday.
5 p.m. Love that. Ambitious.
Easy.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. Let me go ahead and get this started here.
Thanks for joining us. Looks like a
David.
pretty light agenda for the meeting at EOTC.
Hopefully so. This is the, as you noted, this is the preparation meeting for next Thursday's full regular EOTC meeting on May 26th. I'm Dave Pesnicek, the Regional Transportation Administrator for the Elected Official Transportation Committee. A few items I'd like to cover this afternoon. First is covering basic meeting logistics for next Thursday, taking any corrections from the March 24th EOTC decisions reached, and reviewing briefly the action items and the staff recommendations for the two items we have coming up, including the Brush Creek Park and Ride to AABC and Aspen Trail Connection. This is a follow-up from the March 24th meeting, as well as HOV lane enforcement. Also happy to answer any questions you might have on the update items within the packet. So for the meeting next Thursday, this will be hosted by the Town of Snowmass Village. We do have a typical start time of 4 p.m. It will be a combination of in-person and virtual. So the in-person location, again, is Town of Snowmass Village in their council room. The meeting link, if you are attending virtually, I did send it with the packet, and I'll send it again about a day before the meeting, so it's not lost in your email the day of. But I did want to take a roster of who's planning on attending. I heard from Tori, he's not going to be able to make it, but for the rest of everybody, would like to just see whether you're coming, and if so, in person or virtual.
In person.
Okay.
I have to double check my calendar, but I believe in person.
Okay.
That's the goal.
In person. Excellent.
4D, because it takes a long time.
I think I've heard from Rachel also that she'll be attending virtually.
Yep.
All right, excellent. So the next piece is the decisions reached from the March 24th meeting. If you have had a chance to review those decisions reached, I'm happy to take any of the corrections now. If you haven't read through them yet and do before now and next Thursday, feel free to email those corrections over to me. As a reminder, we did have two action items. One is a requested follow-up on the Brush Creek Park and Ride to AABC Trail Connection. So that information is in your packet for the meeting next Thursday, and the action minutes reflect that. And then we did have one approved item, which is the standards for access through the Park and Ride. Just so you know, I haven't heard anything from the AJC since the last meeting, so there is no update in your packet on that, so that's why there's nothing in there. But if you did have any, read through them and have any corrections, I can take those now. Okay.
Flawless.
I'm sure.
Talk.
One there.
What?
One there.
What?
All right, the first,
What does that mean?
to review briefly the first action item coming up next Thursday. This is the Brush Creek Park and Ride to AABC Trail Connection. Just as a brief reminder on this item, this is a partnership project that's currently funded 1/3 by Pickens County Open Space and Trails, which is also lead on the project, 1/3 by the City of Aspen Parks and Open Space, and 1/3 by the EOTC. The review team is consisted of staff from all three jurisdictions, including Snowmass Village and myself. The feasibility study is the outcome to date, or the product to date that you heard from SGM. They provided a detailed overview of that at the last meeting in March. So they put that together in 2021 and finished it up in 2022. But the overall purpose of that feasibility study was to identify technically feasible hard surface ADA accessible trail connections between the Brush Creek Park and Ride and the AABC. So we won't be going through that in detail again next Thursday. But we will be diving more into the public process outline and the additional information that we heard from both the OTC and the Open Space and Trails boards. So the direction that we, again, as a reminder, the direction that we did receive on March 24th was an outline of the proposed process and the additional information that we'd be looking for. So the outcome that we're looking for next Thursday is administrative direction to begin that public process. And the new piece to that is paralleling that with the data gathering phase. So we have, I think hopefully the outline provides a little bit more information in terms of what we'll be looking for when that goes out to RFP to get that information. But before moving on to the HOV lane, obviously we'll be going into this more detail next Thursday, and Gary Tannenbaum and Austin Weiss will be there as well to answer any questions you might have for them. But I'm happy to answer any questions from you now on this item as well.
Rachel?
Yeah, thank you. And sorry to be attending remotely tonight and other nights. I am staying home with COVID at this point. What I was wondering, and I do apologize for having missed the last regular meeting, but when you say we're 1/3 partners with Picken County Open Space and the City of Aspen Open Space and EOTC, is that the agreed upon arrangement for future funding of the actual implementation of the project?
It is not for final construction. So this is the partnership through design that we have so far as a 1/3 partnership. I think there's different
Okay.
financial abilities between the groups, so I wouldn't expect it to stay 1/3 when we get actually to construction.
Yeah, well, I guess I would just have to put out there that I think it's a great project for a variety of reasons, but I really see it as much more primarily recreational in nature and an aesthetic amenity rather than a transportation project. And, as it is now, and I think other people seem to point it out from the minutes, you could take the Buttermilk Park and Ride lot and bike into Aspen if that was your commuter destination. And it doesn't require a $20 million bridge or 2 bridges. And so for me, in terms of what will this do to move the people already on our BRT system faster or better, it doesn't rank as a priority project for me. Similar to the underpass at Buttermilk, it's going to make the buses move a few seconds faster, potentially. But the only real benefit to me is the safety of the pedestrian crossings as opposed to transportation improvements. So for me, I just have to put it on the record, I'm having a hard time with allocating money to very specific projects such as this and ignoring the real gorilla in the room, which is the funding we will need to proceed with the entrance to Aspen at some point. Thank you.
I would just add that the purpose of the additional information is to try to get to a point where we feel comfortable that we have the data and feedback from the public, as well as feedback from experts in terms of how the bridge might impact, or connection, I should say, would impact the transportation patterns within the region. So I wouldn't say that we're to the point now of even on the staff level saying that yes, this is definitely something that must be done. I think that there's more information that needs to be gathered, and the stars align to be able to put this partnership together to start figuring that out.
Great.
Have we determined any sort of metric that we will want to use to evaluate that information with? Is it 50 more cars a day or 50 people riding the bus because they can then ride a bike from Brush Creek? Or is it 25? Is it 125? I mean, I think we need to start talking perhaps at the next meeting next week about what will be the criteria to evaluate. Thank you.
Any other questions here? Thank you, Rachel.
All right, any more comments on this item? We're ready to move on. All right, the next action item for next Thursday, this is the HOV lane enforcement. So this comes to you through the 2022 action plan that the EOTC put forward for 2022. So it was anticipated to be discussed at this meeting. It also was identified as a Tier 1 priority as a part of the near-term transit improvement program. And as you may recall, this was identified as a Tier 1 priority because the two studies leading up to that identified that we needed to have an effective HOV lane in order to act as a carrot for people to start ride sharing. So this is really the precursor to leading up to the development of a ride sharing app. There's a little bit of background on the HOV lane itself. It was approved between Basalt and the airport as a part of the Basalt Buttermilk Record of Decision, so it is part of that approved Federal Highways Administration and CDOT document. And it was constructed between 1996 and 2004, so it's been in place for a number of years now. Just as a reminder on the lane itself, it is not in effect 24 hours a day. It's in effect from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. in the up valley direction and 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. in the down valley direction, only Monday through Friday. And then in order to legally use the lane, you do have to have 2+ occupants. Children do qualify as occupants for this lane. And then also motorcyclists and people with alternative fuel vehicles are allowed to use the lane with only 1 occupant. As a part of the staff report, you'll notice that there were 3 main directions that were reviewed. The first one was an option to increase the sheriff or Colorado State Patrol staffing for overtime in order to enforce the lane. The second option was looking at automated verification and enforcement mechanisms. And the third one was driver education. So I'll go over those in more detail next Thursday. But the outcome that we're looking for next Thursday is really that initial direction based on these 3 main options in terms of developing a plan to move forward with HOV lane enforcement. So the recommendation at this point is administrative direction to develop that plan for HOV lane compliance with Colorado State Patrol and the Pickens County Sheriff's Office, and then to bring that financial request to you as a part of your regular budgeting process for 2023. So Colorado State Patrol and Pickens County Sheriff's Office have indicated their willingness to participate in receiving funds to help enforce the HOV lane. This is a pretty typical mechanism used throughout the country for HOV lane compliance when there's not enough resources allocated on the sheriff's or trooper's end. So that is what we're looking at now. I'm happy to answer any questions you have on the other items within the HOV lane compliance around automated enforcement or verification as well.
I would ask, you mean by automate verification, kind of like the photo tickets for running a red light or speeding or things like that?
That was the idea, yeah. So looking at how that can be used to verify HOV compliance.
Okay, I'd be very interested in that, particularly if they've been used on HOV lanes in other places, or is it just the kind of stoplight cameras?
So I can tell you it's outlined in the packet as well. So in Colorado, a law enforcement officer has to be present in order to issue a citation. So there's some exceptions that are carved out for stoplight enforcement in certain jurisdictions, is my understanding. But in terms of HOV compliance, we do have to have a law enforcement officer there. So that, in addition to, in order to really have or utilize automated enforcement, we have to be darn near 100% effective in terms of the technology. And we're very close. The technologies that I've seen are in the 95 to 98% effectiveness range, but that's still not effective enough in order to get state law to follow up and allow that technology to be used for HOV enforcement. Appears to be where we are right now, and I did not find any example nationwide where it's been used solely for HOV enforcement.
Thank you.
I just wonder if this is a solution looking for a problem. Metering on, like from the park and ride to Basalt. I live in town. I don't do that oftentimes in rush hour traffic, but I wonder how much of a need there really is for HOV enforcement. I can see it from the park and ride into town, but I'm not convinced that we need to be putting energies into enforcing it So some kind of a quantitative analysis of what's to be gained from this. I'm skeptical of putting funds into this. But we'll talk about that next Thursday.
Just so I'm understanding it, I think not so much a solution looking for a problem looking for a solution, right? Isn't sort of the idea that people are kind of getting a free ride with the extra lane, where if it's enforced in the way it's supposed to, people are going to feel the sort of less pleasurable effects of the traffic earlier on, and that would be an incentive to change behavior? Is that sort of the idea?
Yeah, essentially, it's to have the highway operate the way it was intended. So right now, we don't have numbers to back up what compliance is, but it is very low, anecdotally. I would be surprised if it's bumping into the double digits. But the idea is with enforcement, and if we did have compliance, then that does start to congest the left lane.
Right.
And when that lane gets congested, the people who are using the lane as appropriate, meaning high occupancy, two plus people per vehicle, then have an incentive to increase that.
Right,
that
which
car.
could then decongest later on, but it's going to take some time, if that makes sense, Ward. So,
You know, it's
you're
interesting
right,
here
but,
in that we have this lane right up against the bus lane. And the bus-only lane, we have very high compliance on, but we have very low compliance on the HOV side of it.
it's a
And-
weird HOV line.
What's that?
I said it's a weird HOV line. You expect it to be on the other side. You don't even know it's there. No one follows it. I mean, you could be forgiven for having no idea that we even have them.
I think that's what we've run up against.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a question, if that's okay.
It would be great if we could get CDOT to paint the diamonds again, which does help us all understand that. But, you know, for this item and perhaps to try to help answer Ward's question, is I think we should talk to some RAFTA drivers on the BRT route. You know, for me, it's more about when that bus comes up to a stoplight in or in Basalt, or, you know, the ones there at Old Snowmass and continuing to come up the valley, will the buses with the transit riders be behind 15 cars with single occupant vehicles who just didn't pay attention? And you know, that's kind of, you don't see it bunched up until you get to the traffic lights. But that's where, you know, if I was a carpooler and taking the extra time to pick up extra people and, you know, share my vehicle with them, and then all the single occupant vehicles are just right in front of me, why bother to carpool? There's simply no advantage.
I think, Rachel, we're actually going
I
to,
think the bus drivers would have some sense of whether that is an impediment or it's not an issue.
Rachel, actually, rather than having CDOT repaint the diamonds, we're going to have a community event where we all go duct tape them in to show community solidarity.
Not on Highway 82.
I have a question about the driver education and what that does or doesn't include.
Driver's education, we're looking at primarily press releases, signage, use of the DMS and the CDOT DMSs.
Okay.
We do have a new public outreach coordinator at the county that I would be looking to work with. I'm sure she has more creative ideas than I do, not being a typical public outreach person.
Right. Got it. Okay. Thank you.
And Ward, before I forget, it's not specifically noted in here, but I think that the do-nothing option is certainly always on the table. Similar with what we discussed with the bridge connections from Bryce Creek. You know, that's why we're coming to you, you know, to get the feedback. Isn't necessarily to just tweak what we have or the direction that we're recommending we go, but to say, actually, we don't think that we should be going this way at all. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Thanks, David.
Yeah.
I guess, I mean, I'll make some comments here just because the people that I represent comment to me. And HOV, there's so many questions about who uses them. You know, you said that there's exemptions for motorcycles, electric vehicles. But the bus lanes themselves and people wanting to have shuttles be able to use bus lanes, people wanting to, have general traffic use bus lanes at certain times. And it's just, when we talk about that issue of HOV enforcement, there's a lot of different opinions about what would make the highway operate better. And so it's interesting to have that conversation unto itself without kind of talking about everything else. For years, I was like, instead of HOV, I was like, it would be great, have a commercial lane and a personal vehicle lane. I don't know what that achieves. I'm just throwing out some ideas. Get the buses out of the HOV. I mean, just on and on. There's just so many different takes on what would make the highway work best. And so when we talk about that and enforcement as behavior change, I appreciate fellow council members bringing up some of their questions around this because I have the same. So I'll send Ward some comments maybe for EOTC meeting, but I appreciate what they're representing here. I just want to bring that up because that's the conversation that I hear around this. It's not so much about HOV enforcement. It's about really how do we use these lanes better. So I don't know.
I would say that this is an attempt to try to utilize what we already have better as opposed to necessarily changing what we have. And I think it's important legally to keep the bus lanes separate from the HOV lanes because they really do function legally in two different universes in terms of the record of decision.
Great.
Thank you for that.
Thanks.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
And then one comment, because I won't be there Thursday, congratulations on getting a start on the food truck program out at the
Yeah.
Park and Ride. That's something that I think if you've been watching any of the discussions that we've been having, that we're having an in-town discussion about that now and going to go out to see if there's other people that are interested in taking a spot down here at Rio Grande. But I thank you for the update and thank you for putting more energy than we thought maybe was needed, but getting it done and getting it going this year.
Yeah, I did want to update you guys a little bit more on that than from what was in the packet. So since then, we have signed a lease. So last week, we got a lease signed. I understand the vendor, which is Taqueria El Yaqui. They're in West Glenwood and near Walgreens in Glenwood now, so they'll have 2 locations, and then this will be their 3rd location.
Sweet.
And they just got a new trailer, got it in, I think they're expected to get it in this Friday, and they're hoping to get set up next week.
Awesome.
So you should see them out here shortly.
Send us an email when it's up and running.
I will.
What are the restroom facilities out there currently?
Currently, it's portable toilets.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then is there going to be an outreach effort? Is it communicating that there is the opportunity to take a pit stop and both empty and refill yourself at the Brush Creek Park and Ride?
Yeah, need to work on that still in terms of exactly what that looks like. The vendor themselves, they'll be doing some outreach as well, I'm sure, to get customers.
Did our direct messaging board get back operable? Have we fixed that problem?
It is. It's back and operable. So it's Blake Fitch is operating it out of his office. He's the primary controller for that now. So if you've been by it during commute times up Valley, we got a message about the free bus at the Brush Creek Park and Ride on it right now.
I don't know if it'll work enough, if it works efficiently enough, but maybe you also want to say, food, drink, and restrooms available at Brush Creek Park and Ride on that sign or something like that as well. Free, it's the package deal that we're looking for. Put your car here. You don't have to pay for parking. You get a free bus ride in. You can grab a bite. You can use the restroom. It's a great place to take a pit stop.
Yeah, I don't disagree. We get into issues with CDOT and what we can and can't put on the sign in terms of promoting a private business.
Tacos, Tinkle, transportation.
We'll have to talk about that a little bit to see what the possibilities might
Great.
be. Yeah.
Great. But thank you again for that.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
guys.
Hey, Tori, I think that's a great idea, and while I don't have anything hard and fast here, we probably want to start promoting the food truck at some level, and You know, maybe we could develop some $1,000 worth of coupons with EOTC money or something like that, and offer them as rewards to some of our bus riders, excuse me, or something like that. But you know, I think kind of celebrate that and do a little bit of a promotion around it would be appropriate. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a nice idea.
Love that idea.
David, is that something that maybe should be brought to the EOTC next Thursday as an idea for support, or?
I think, let me think about that in terms of the coupons. I
Yeah.
think certainly support we can do in terms of outreach. And I want to make sure that they actually are there and set up before I start promoting anything.
Oh, yeah.
In case something falls through, I'd hate to build
Yeah.
something up.
Understand, you know, I guess the general sentiment here is that this council believes that, hey, we should really promote this and try to utilize it and get the message out and try to see if it's going to generate some activity out there. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
See you next week.
All right, we're going to go right into item number 2. We are going to an update on fleet electrification, and Tessa is here with us.
It's just a transportation kind of day.
Did you guys bring tacos as well?
I'm so sorry, we did not. I ate all of them.
Where'd they go?
Naturally occurring composting.
All right, well, good afternoon, council. It's great to see you again. We're here with yet another update on the carbon goal, here to talk about fleet electrification. You know me, I'm Tessa Schreiner, the Sustainability Manager for the city, and with me is Tim Karfs, our Sustainability Programs Administrator. His first time in front of council today as the subject matter expert for fleet electrification. So we'll dive right in. Great. So the purpose of the work session today is to provide council with an update on our fleet electrification efforts, and then also to get direction on whether staff should move forward with creating a fleet electrification plan, and if staff should move forward on bringing back a resolution for the city of Aspen to join Go EV City. And just to be clear, what we mean by fleet electrification today is incorporating more zero-emission vehicles and electric vehicles into the city's fleet and equipment. So I will pass it along to Tim to take it away.
Okay, hello, council. My name is Tim Karfs. Thanks for the introduction, Tessa.
Hi, Tim.
Nice to meet and see you all.
Welcome.
Nice to meet and see you all. Today's agenda will explore, first of all, the why for fleet electrification. We'll look at where we are now, and then explore opportunities and impact for progressively electrifying our city fleet. We'll then give some background on Go EV City, which information and a accompanying slide deck was attached in the packet handed to you before this presentation. And then we'll end the presentation with time for questions and discussion and to outline next steps as well. So why fleet electrification? Well, in 2021, Council set 3 two-year carbon goals, one of which was the reduction of carbon that specifically called out emissions reductions in the transportation sector. In January of this year, Council approved ambitious science-based targets that specifically call out a 63% reduction in emissions by 2030, and then followed by a very aggressive and ambitious emissions reduction to achieve 100% net zero by 2050. As seen in this pie chart, transportation emissions are notoriously difficult to pinpoint. What we see here is that the transportation portion of the pie is 26% of our total community emissions. 15% of that, the majority share, is actually belonging to the airport, which staff jurisdictionally just don't have that much authority and control to have much influence on policy shifts there. So what we're really focusing on today is the 11% of on-road transportation emissions. And those are specifically those that, it's the pollution emanating from vehicle tailpipes on our city roads. Community emissions, as compared to our municipal emissions seen in the municipal greenhouse gas inventory, represent 24% of our total emissions, which is the largest source of emissions amongst our city-owned assets. This is a huge piece of the pie, and we've got a lot of potential to progressively and incrementally adjust that. To put this in perspective, municipal emissions from fleet-owned vehicles, particularly from on-road diesel and gasoline use, equivalent to about 1,524,074 miles driven on city roads. So addressing on-road transportation and fleet emissions has been a huge priority of our climate action plan in the past. 2017 Aspen Community Electric Vehicle Community Readiness Plan. Then our 2021 Aspen Public Charging Infrastructure Master Plan. In summary, the city has a great opportunity to lead by example in the diversification and transition from electric to zero emission fleet vehicles and equipment, and most importantly, to set a precedent for other community members, those being restaurants, hotels, private organizations within our community to follow suit. So where are we now with our efforts to reduce our city fleet vehicle emissions? So as of May 2022, we've got 125 vehicles in our municipal fleet. We've got 110 mobile and stationary pieces of equipment, not including golf carts. And at the end of 2021, we had 8 electric vehicles, 3 plug-in electric hybrid vehicles, and 9 hybrid vehicles, which was great. But to the remark and to the applaud of the Aspen Police Department and their addition of the 5 Tesla Model Ys, which represent part of their fleet, their pilot of fleet vehicles, we achieved a 62.5% increase in the amount of electric vehicles currently in our inventory. And when looking at the overall vision of low and zero emission vehicles in our fleet, that would be a 25% overall increase. So this is a big kudos to Linda and the officials at the Aspen Police Department, and how exciting. I mean, that wrap over there is
Looks
quite,
so good. It's first I've seen it. It looks awesome.
it's quite cool.
Is spring and summer on the other side?
Good question.
And let's see a 360 on that.
Front, spring, like summer, and then goes to winter in the back.
You need a tour. That sounds awesome.
This is my first time seeing this. It looks great.
It looks so good.
Thanks for the unveiling. Yeah.
When does
Really
council get a
exciting.
loan a car program?
They got to go to Glenwood.
So while the Climate Action Plan, the EV Readiness Plan, and the EV Public Charging Master Plan all provide a very powerful impetus for us to act on fleet emissions, none of these documents provide clear steps for staff on how to actually achieve a really incremental and significant addition of EVs to our fleet. So the opportunities and impact are really exciting. As seen with the Tesla Model Ys, EVs are able to take on many of the same tasks that can be formerly attributed to gasoline-powered vehicles. The first impact area is a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, as seen on previous slides, and really noticed on our in the community side, but more on the municipal side, we have a really enormous span of control over the amount of greenhouse emissions that we can choose to delete and put into our inventories every year with additional EVs. EVs represent a significant annual operating savings. That's both just with charging instead of refueling, and then just with the annual operating costs of those vehicles over the lifetime of their operations. Then, as you look at the state of the industry, we've got industry titans such as General Motors and Ford making really bold promises to transition their fleets and production lines over to electric vehicles by as early as 2025, which is a really great indicator for how reliable and better performing and more accessible these vehicles will be in the short term and definitely in the long term as well. Finally, the City of Aspen has an opportunity to take on more of an enormous leadership opportunity with a fleet electrification plan. EVs are a really salient and observable metric in the community for what we are doing as staff and as a city to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And so I think there's a massive opportunity to take advantage of just the general excitement and energy around vehicle electrification within our community, and then to broadcast and signal those lessons learned across all sectors.
Can I ask you a quick question right
Yeah.
there? And this may be for the both of you, but also Linda. I assume that by putting those into our fleet, the Teslas that is, that there are probably interested communities. There are probably interested parties beyond just communities, actually. Am I right in that? I would think that people are like, hey, is this working for you guys? You know, you guys did a great job of vetting these out, doing cost analysis and the like. So are other communities contacting and say, hey, we want to know, let us learn from what you're doing?
Yes, definitely. I think that this is a huge just opportunity to share lessons learned, especially for specialized vehicles like our police vehicles, and Linda could speak more to that if she has more to add. But yeah, I mean, I think that this is a massive opportunity for us to tell the story and our successes and also our lessons learned.
So far, we've had Grand Junction contact us. But there's, as you saw when we first presented, there's already a lot of communities nationwide that have already gone with the Teslas. And so we're actually using their data to, to support ours. And so right now, the vehicles, we're starting to also track the data just to make sure that if we move forward, we can actually, make sure that we can come to you guys and say, okay, this is working for us and this is why, and this is how much saving we're doing and the impact that we're having on the environment as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
And just anecdotally, just in the writing of this report, there was officials from Summit County and Biel area and Boulder that were really interested in what the police were doing. So just to move on to this roadmap we've created for the need for a fleet electrification plan that identifies certain opportunities and barriers, and mostly opportunities along the way. So the first is collaboration. This is a real exciting moment to start creating a plan together across multiple departments, and kind of getting collaborative input and buy-in from each stakeholder within those departments, including department heads. The goal here is to work within current systems and enhance the current approach to incorporate more and greater numbers of EVs. Supply chain issues is the next opportunity here, which is certainly a challenge, as you all know, but in itself gives us the time to stand back and actually have like a really good foresight into what we predict we will need to accommodate greater numbers of EVs in the future. So in itself, this is an opportunity. EV procurement, due to the high upfront costs linked to electrification, the fleet electrification planning document aims to understand how to make purchasing more viable across all departments. Staff don't really know the answers to all of these questions yet, but it's really important in acknowledging upfront that there will be additional costs. We just need to figure out creative ways and solutions and strategies to addressing them. And that could be just simple strategies like leasing versus buying as an option for procurement. The fleet electrification plan would then just would aim to attribute more emphasis on greenhouse gas reductions as part of the procurement process. So fleet analysis is a critical step here as well, and that'll involve just looking at our current fleet and seeing which are suitable and viable for replacement, and the timeline for those replacement. We've got to incorporate an element of pragmatism here, knowing that right now the technology is so that we can't replace all the vehicles overnight on the schedule that we're handed. However, we do really need to have an in-depth look at what we can achieve, and I think there's some realizable and substantial wins that we can achieve in this field as well. And then finally, and one of the biggest questions that we would hope to address in this fleet electrification plan is to look introspectively and understand where and how we're going to charge fleet vehicles across all departments. And that's looking at city buildings and facilities and understanding where the charging resources are and the times that we can charge them. The EV public charging infrastructure master plan in 2021 was really good at identifying opportunities for public-facing charging opportunities, And this is an exercise of kind of looking inward and seeing what we could achieve within our own and currently owned assets. So now onward to our next area where we are asking for council consideration, which is the opportunity for Aspen to join the Go EV City Coalition, which is made up of 10 other members from all across Colorado. We're talking about cities like Fort Collins, Boulder County, town of Vail as well. And these cities are all made this commitment and pledged to eventually transition their community and their fleet to 100% electric and zero emission vehicles, which is really exciting. Beyond the need for the coalition and this commitment, we hope to gain best practices and kind of communicate the benefits through all our internal departments and kind of just incorporate what other cities are doing so that we can be a thought leader in this space as well, which is really important. And most importantly, there's no cost of membership. So in conclusion, the staff have formulated two recommendations to optimize the number of EVs in our current fleet, and really follow in the footsteps of cities like Seattle and New York and Boulder to progressively and commit to more electric and zero emission vehicles and equipment in our inventory. The first recommendation is for the City Council to approve the development of a fleet electrification plan during the summer of 2022. And the second request is for Aspen to sign on to the Go EV City commitment to 100% electric and zero emission vehicles. And now we've just got time for questions and discussions, and we'd love to open it up to anyone on council for follow-up.
Thanks, Tim. First question, how does this fit into the work plan? So where is it prioritized? What aren't we doing if we're doing that? I mean, it seems these days we have a lot of trade-offs with anything. So I guess my first question to you is, where does this fit in with what we're doing and maybe some of the other goals that council has in our environmental health and environmental initiatives? So I guess that's the first question I have is, like, I don't know how this fits in. I would hate to give direction like, yeah, this is great, but then to find out, oh, well, the reason we're not pursuing other things. Anyway, you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely, yeah. So for accomplishing council's goal, we have identified 5 key elements, 3 of which tie directly to our greenhouse gas emissions, which are transportation, waste, and buildings. And so we're working heavily on buildings, obviously with Building IQ and the passing of Building IQ last month. Fleet and waste are the 2 others. So this is a high priority for our office, something very much worth the time in not only developing this plan, which is a starting point, but to really begin transitioning our fleet to reduce ours and the community's emissions. So I would say this is quite a high priority, especially on the council goal list and on our office's work plan.
Okay, I support this effort moving forward 100%. I have reservations about where we are with our waste diversion. So for me, I want to see energy and effort going into that, and if this is taking away from any of that opportunity, then I would not be supportive of it, because I feel like we've got a big thing coming up, right? We've said to the community that they can expect some downtown commercial composting programs coming up, and so I want to make sure that we're able to carry that through. In our last conversations about that, Rachel was actually saying, that not just waiting till that 12-month stand, but things that can be done on the pathway to that date that we want to see composting initiated, or implemented. So that's my concern. I do support this effort, and I think we're doing a great job here, but I want to make sure that our waste diversion stays on track.
Yeah, I hear that, and I don't see any reason why these can't happen both simultaneously, but thank you for that consideration.
Thank you for that. Wardo.
Well, I think you guys know I'm a fan of EVs, but I question whether this is a little bit premature for the amount of EV vehicles that are available now, what the supply chain is. I think the fleet analysis and some pre-planning could be in order, but for what's in the supply chain, there's not a lot. I mean, we could go out and get some, I have a reservation for an F-150 Lightning and a Silverado both. But we're looking at 2024 before that comes up. So if the city puts in a couple of reservations, when they become available, they might be able to purchase them. But pickup trucks, I mean, the Rivian, we've seen a couple of those around, and I've read that the Lightning, that there are a bunch of them sitting around, they're having some chip problems. But I look forward to the day when I can get a Lightning or a Silverado EV. But we have purchased electric where we can. The Parks and Trails, I think, have purchased some electric. I can't if they're Polaris or what they are, but they've purchased some of those. But I think to analyze what the supply chain is, what's available, and to do some cost analysis of those. I know I did some numbers on, and Linda did numbers on, I think it was after 5 years or so, it's better to hang on. You don't have any oil changes, that's a nice thing. But I just question if we need to put a lot of effort into this because there's just not a lot of vehicles available yet.
Do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to comment on that. So I think that's a really good thing to bring up, and that the availability of vehicles for like the small, medium, and large or heavy-duty vehicles is limited, especially when we get up to that heavy-duty portion. I think what this fleet electrification plan does is allows us to really start planning to reach our 2050 goals, even if it says we need a couple years of waiting or development for more vehicles to come out or for the Lightning to be available on the market. This allows for us to really plan for that and also to take a hard look at what our existing replacement schedule is and really start to think about strategically where we need to insert or are able to insert an electric vehicle where we would be able to take out a gas-powered vehicle in its place. So I hear you, and I think that there are other benefits to having this strategic plan that bring in finance and streets and parks and all of our different departments to have a higher level conversation, even if the plan doesn't say, here's the exact schedule for exactly when we're gonna buy these vehicles. It's more about thinking strategically and longer term.
I just want to say I approve wholeheartedly with both of these things we're discussing, and pardon the metaphor, but I think we should keep our foot on the gas as far as being educated about advances in electric motors. I know in California they recently outlawed lawn mowers and leaf blowers, and I think all these are opportunities for for government to help educate the public on what's available. I've noticed recently that not only are there electric snowmobiles available, but the same company, Taiga, out of Canada, is making an electric personal watercraft now. Not that we need those. Also on the market are electric riding lawnmowers. So I think as sustainability leaders, we need to keep our eye on all the opportunities that are available that will be coming on the market more and more as time goes on. So thanks for your work.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John. Skippy?
Yeah, I have a few questions. I was going to say, in the obscure annals of electrification, the Woody Creek racetrack, which has been racing cars since the 60s, is switching their race car fleet to all electric. Are in the process of. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Questions. So if we were to have, all 110 of our fleet vehicles electric tomorrow, how many of them charge on the renewable city grid versus non-city grid?
That's a great question, Skippy, and it'll be important to kind of investigate that charging question within the plan itself. And also when we look at an eventual replacement to electric vehicles, it wouldn't happen overnight, but that charging question is sincerely a big one that we will have to address.
Got it. And you may not know this off the top of your head, but when is Holy Cross goal to be 100% renewable? What is the date?
2030, I believe.
2030. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean.
But they say they might get there a little earlier than that.
Got it. I'm just thinking, space-wise, and if they're hooked up to that, where's that power actually coming from? Because where do we measure that CO2 reduction? Is it at the tailpipe or at the area of extraction? So, of our fleet, what percentage of our vehicles are passenger-like vehicles? So I would include the police vehicles. Obviously, they're retrofitted into a specialty vehicle, but the base chassis or whatever is a traditional SUV. And so what percentage of those are based on normal kind of commercial, vehicles versus specialty vehicles like a street sweeper or a dump truck?
I'll have to complete just a bit further analysis in the fleet spreadsheet to probably answer that question.
Okay, because I know when we went to CML, yeah, Ward got to see some of those more specialty vehicles and the kind of early electrified stuff. So they're starting to emerge. But my guess is the development is a bit behind. So I am kind of curious, knowing what we do know now, where do we start and why? And where do we think will take the longest and why?
Yeah, I mean, I can take a crack at answering that to chime in. I think we have to start with what we have and what we know. I mean, to Ward's point of what's available right now and what we know has been tried and true and tested, for the Teslas, for example, or the Chevy Bolt, the Leaf, and the equipment. So to John's point of, proven electric mowers, blowers, those kinds of things that we know are tried, true, and tested out there that exist on the market. And then really that question, which I think will definitely be considered in this development of this plan, is how quickly do we want to adopt those new technologies that maybe only have like a street sweeper, are new, or there's an electric fire truck, and those only a few exist on the market. But how quickly and how fast do we want to adopt those larger vehicles? So I think starting with what we know, what is available, and then deciding how quickly we want to push for innovation for when those larger, some are already on the market, but when those larger vehicles are readily available.
Got it. And then the last question is just, kind of placing us amongst other communities. We join this Go EV thing. Is there a date commitment associated with that? And if there isn't, do other communities have set dates for 100% electrification identified?
Yes, it's in line with our science-based targets of 100% electrification by 2050.
Okay, so it's a ways out. Are there any communities that have a more aggressive goal than that?
Yeah, I would look into Boulder County's electrification plan.
Okay.
Yep.
What, do they have a date or a year?
I can't remember off the top of
It's
my head.
okay. It's okay. I think I'm asking you guys a lot of questions, and you're like, yeah, that's you're giving us the go ahead to figure that out. But I'm curious. I think this is really important. You have my full support to move forward with this, including joining Go EV. I think this is an important exercise in leadership and results, but I do want to highlight what Tori said. I think in both our global, local impact and our ability to lead, becoming a net zero waste community is the single greatest thing we can do by orders of magnitude. If we didn't pick up any of this work tomorrow, plenty of other communities we've seen would go all electric. It's not a reason for us to not lean in there, but if the question is, do we have to prioritize, I would absolutely prioritize that, and I'm very happy to hear, as our resident 7, that we can do both. So let's go forth and do it.
Got it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Rachel?
Yes, thank you. I want to second the concerns that Tori put on the table about overall workload, but I really think there's a way to develop this plan without necessarily running into that. And you guys have already talked about the outlines and the framework of this. And, just for me, as a reminder to council, one way or the other, this late summer or fall, we're going to see the 2023 budget, and it's going to have a certain number of vehicles that are getting replaced. And we're all going to ask, well, could they be electric vehicles? Yeah, we are. And this is about getting out ahead of that 2023, 24, and 25 budgets with some guidance and direction and, kind of no-go criteria for given departments depending on their needs. If it's a a burly pickup truck that's not quite on the market yet, they're going to be a lot further out. And this, I would imagine, is going to be coinciding with the natural replacement level for most of our vehicles. It's really hard for me to imagine, you know, a gas-powered vehicle that we may have purchased 18 months ago being replaced right off the bat while it still only has 20,000 miles. You know, there's a practical side to this, and that practical side is getting the use out of what we have so that we can be saving for what we will replace it with in those various departments. And so I see this as really a phasing plan, and I think that should we run into challenges like with streets and plowing and some of the motor grader work, then we just set that aside and we don't spend a lot of time trying to find substitutes for that at this time. And so I think of it as kind of a prioritization and a syncing with what would be Fleet's normal replacement schedule for vehicles, whether it's the water department or electric department and so on and so forth. So kind of paraphrasing John, I think we should keep our foot on the accelerator and move this forward. My other personal comment on this is that I would rather move the charging issue up further backwards into that roadmap and have it much more concurrent with some of these other items. And my thought is that, no, I'm not sure we would be a leader or example for other communities. As Skippy has said, others are certainly going down this path as quickly as they're able as well. But we would be a very good example to our community. And to be a good example to our community, we certainly have already been installing charging stations, but I think the future of the need and demand for charging stations is going to be pretty high. And the more that we can demonstrate by using electric vehicles as annual replacements come up, and that we provide the infrastructure for charging ourselves as we would as if we are a business, and for the community, for their needs, I think it will all come together really well. So those are my overall comments. I'd love to see this progress. I absolutely know that we just replace vehicles every year, and as has been pointed out, the electric vehicles are still at a stage where they're more expensive than fossil fuel vehicles, but they certainly have higher maintenance and wear and tear on those fossil fuel vehicles than the electrics. And I just want us to sync up our replacements when they happen as closely as possible with clean energy. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. John?
Yeah, I just really quick wanted to add on to my comments about electric lawnmowers. When I was reading about these new electric lawnmowers that are available, it's mentioned that a normal gas-powered two-cycle engine puts out as much greenhouse gases in 1 hour as a standard American car does being driven 300 miles. Imagine this. City employees mowing Wagner Park with a very quiet riding lawnmower. Tourists and locals alike would see this and say, I like this.
Yeah, it's a great visual.
But setting the example, I think, is a huge advantage that we have.
Really good visual. Thanks,
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you, Council. So what we've heard then is support to come back with a fleet electrification plan for council consideration later this year, and to not let it get in the way of other priorities for our office, which we are constantly juggling as climate change is, an ever increasing concern, and we've got a lot of work to do. The second is that we will bring back a resolution for the city of Aspen to join Go EV City and be the 11th community in Colorado to do so. And we look forward to learning from that coalition as well.
Just one last thought. Yeah, we would like to see that wrap in person. I brought you guys into that, but I'd really like to see it. I'd like to see it. And it's just, that Rachel's comment really stood out to me, right? It is about demonstrating something to our community. And so that wrap did a incredible job. You just saw it happen at the table of all of us really taking note of that change, which we may not have otherwise noticed if it was just a black car. And so, as we're thinking about rolling this out, how do we make those electric vehicles really stand out in a great way? I think you guys really kicked that off perfectly. Yeah, it's really cool.
Great. Well, thank you, council. We
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, you did? I want to see it.
You have council board reports and updates,
Yeah.
and then we're going to switch over, so.
Okay.
If anybody wants to start, board reports or updates?
I don't need a report to tell you I'm bored. Oh, what?
I have no board reports.
Excellent.
Yes, I have no board reports.
Love that. Rachel, do you want to do APCHA? That's the only thing I've got.
Skippy, I'm not sure you're not going to be able to cover that a little better than me.
Okay.
If you'd like, what I can report is that next week I'll be going to the Colorado Cooperation meeting in Pueblo. It's a meeting of West Slope, East Slope concerns, and talking about kind of the state of where the legislature ended up and those sort of things. We have an APCHA board meeting tomorrow night, and I know that the survey has gone out for asking people about right sizing and what motivates them to consider such moves. I personally got one myself, so I know that has gone out and the work continues.
That's
And
awesome.
anything else you'd like to add on APCHA would be great. And I did go to the Rudai Water and Power Authority meeting last night. Last Thursday. And the one thing I would really point out, it's of concern to me, but they're not expecting Rudai to fill all the way this year. The tunnels that take water eastward, the Boosthead and the Busk Ivanhoe, are both flowing, about 120% above normal for this time of year because of the heat and the early runoff we're experiencing. And I just have been curious about this issue of, well, wait a second, Rudai is augmentation water for the take from the Roaring Fork and the Hunter Creek on the west slope. And should the Front Range be allowed to take their full share first, kind of, as they're doing, when we don't believe Rudai our augmentation water will be 100% fulfilled. And then you could actually layer on top of that Rudai was used last year for emergency releases to help boost up Lake Powell so that they would still maintain the power generation there, and it was reaching critical levels. But that release of our augmentation water into the Colorado River system meant that we went into last winter, 21, 22, without the water we would normally have in that reservoir. And so we were starting kind of further behind the curve for the fill this year. And it just seems inappropriate that we're not getting a full fill of the augmentation water to make up for the take that's happening eastward, because none of the water eastward comes back over or will be able to be contributed to that Colorado River system should there be an additional call this year. And it's really concerning. I have reached out to our River District representative, John Ely, with an email, who's our county rep, and that's all you get is one. And then actually wrote an email today to the director of the River District, Andy Mueller, to ask him about this question of, it's like we had to use our augmentation water rather than water our crops or municipal needs or anything like that to send it down to Powell so that others can keep pumping eastward and dewatering our streams. So that was kind of really one of the real larger thrusts that was coming out of the Rudai Water and Power Authority meeting. I would also note that April Long, our director, applied to the County Healthy Rivers and Streams Fund and received funding to reinvigorate and restart up the Roaring Fork Water Collaborative, which was a group of professionals and citizens throughout the entire watershed and water managers, say with the River District or Fish and Wildlife and so on, who would meet once a quarter in Carbondale and kind of discuss current issues, current legislation, and opportunities in the water world. So those are the boards I've been working on since our last report. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rachel.
Not much to add. Rachel covered the meeting, the APSHA meeting. We have a handful of potential regulation changes that were brought forward for just a check-in with the board of, do you want to look at these? They are coming back to us, so as we get more details from staff, I will follow up. 2 little tidbits of information that came from our executive director comments that I think are interesting, because we often hear feedback that we need to better understand our system. The owner affidavit. We are down to just one person in the entire system that has not turned that in. And so, you know, the data gathering is substantially complete in a way it hasn't been before, which is great. And you guys have heard of these vacant units for these lower category partnership projects that have, in some cases, you know, 50% caps on AMI for income. And the board had asked staff to do some additional proactive marketing down valley. You know, our lower income workers maybe don't even know these exist. And so that has happened. Part of that was in Spanish, which is new and different and good. And 2 of those 8 vacant units have been filled. I can't say as a result of that, but it may be as a result of that, which is good. So it's a good starting point to sort of a new approach to communication and reaching our full working community. That's it.
Word. What?
You missed that.
I was talking about something. Right on. Well, I don't have any updates myself. You guys had a presentation from ACRA. CAST hasn't met. The Wheeler board is kind of business as usual right now. They're you know, trying to get as many shows in this summer as we can because the music school has allowed us to have some usage this summer. So a little bit different in programming there. The Wheeler is going to be doing some shows. But other than that, I don't have any real board updates at this time. Cool. John is planning on going to CML tomorrow. I don't know if he mentioned that or not, but
True story.
tomorrow in Glenwood.
Core on Thursday.
Oh, fun. And Nordic Council sometime this week, too.
Right.
Trails are closed. That's the update. We're
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Lot to report from Nordic.
It's already 5:15. Our next meeting was called for 5 o'clock, so let's just take a 2 or 3 minute break. Everybody get what you need for the next round here. And then we'll get started here at about 20 after 5:20. Thank you very much. Welcome back, or welcome. This is the Aspen City Council special meeting that's been scheduled for May 17, 2022. Let the record show that we're starting at 5:20. And that'll be a call to order. Can we have a roll call for attendance, please?
Counselor Doyle,
Here.
Counselor Howenstein,
Here.
Counselor Mazzaro,
Present.
Counselor Richards,
Here
Mayor Tory.
from afar.
Here. All right, tonight we have appeals hearings. We have 3 appeals in front of us, and I believe Mr. Bryan is representing all 3.
Yes.
The first one is consideration of Bryce Johnson and Laura Biel appeal. This is an appeal from the Community Development Director's determination that Ordinance Number 6, Series 2022 is applicable to the appellant's building permit application submitted on March 15th, 2022. And that is 506 West Hallam, lots P and Q. Kate,
Good
will you
afternoon,
be
Council.
introducing this?
I can, yes. I think you did a good job of describing it. This is an appeal that pursuant to Ordinance 6 Series of 2022 is set to go before City Council. So the question before you is, the Community Development Department received an application for 506 West Hallam. That application was for a building permit that requested development on this particular lot. The application was rejected as incomplete. The owners of that, of the property have appealed that decision. In your packet, you received both a written brief by myself and then Chris Bryan on behalf of the applicants. The land use code in this case sets the standard of review. I can certainly reiterate that here if you would like me to, but it was in all the written materials. In the past, Mayor, you have taken argument. It is within your discretion to do so here again today, just to give both parties an opportunity to plead their case, so to speak. And certainly if you have any questions or need any clarification on any issues, we're happy to provide that.
Thank you. At some point, I would like to know what the deficiencies were
Okay.
for the public record, and what deems it incomplete. We can do that now, or I am,
Okay, we can do that now. I will note that in your record, the actual email was provided. Present here today is Ms. Muhi Gira, she is the Deputy Chief Building Official who issued this determination. With respect to 506 West Hallam, the deficiencies were provided in an email on March 30th to the applicant. They were, one, that they did not submit any development order or notice of approval showing that they had received residential design standard approval, which is required pursuant to the city's land use code, that they did not provide an ECU calculator, that they did not provide landscape plans, that they did not provide a Class A roof assembly, that they did not provide structural verification for wall demolition, that they did not provide asbestos tests, and there is a verification form that you fill out that verifies whether or not your project needs asbestos testing. In this particular case, based upon the application, staff felt that it was necessary. They did not provide a special inspection agreement. They did not provide U-value information for proposed windows and doors, which has to do with energy code requirements, and they did not provide shoring plans. Now, I will say that the land use code, Chapter 26 or Title 26 of the Municipal Code does govern building code applications, specifically 26-304-090 governs building permit applications, and that has a specific section regarding completeness review and acceptance that basically states that the chief building official has the discretion to, is tasked with reviewing these and is, per this code section, it shall not accept an either partially complete or incomplete application. On the city's website, the city has developed fairly extensive policies on what's required for building applications. There's a link, and in the record, you'll see this. The permit application itself references that, please, there's links to click on pages that provide you information on what documents are needed for a building permit. Included in those documents is in this particular case an international residential code, which we've adopted the International Building Code and the International Residential Building Code as part of our regulations. But included in these documents is a submittal guide for residential building permits. And pursuant to that residential submittal guide, it provides applicants with a full explanation of what is required. Each of these documents is referenced within that submittal guide and provides applicants with direction on what's required and when it's required. These applications were all submitted within a window between the court's order enjoining enforcement of Ordinance 27 and then your adoption of Ordinance 6. The court order was issued on March 11th around 10:45 p.m. Ordinance 6 was passed by you at second reading, I believe, on March 15th at approximately 1:22 p.m. This application was submitted pursuant to the city's online submittal portal before 1:22 on March 15th. That's not in dispute. What is in dispute is whether or not it was deemed complete. And then, of course, the applicants, through their attorney, Mr. Bryan, have made some legal arguments, and those are included in their briefs, and certainly he can speak on those.
Thank you for that summary. Skippy?
Just one more clarifying question, and thank you for listing some of the deficiencies in at least the 506 West Hallam. During the period where these three applications were brought forward and denied for being incomplete, am I correct in understanding that there was also at least one that was submitted and deemed complete and accepted?
Correct.
Okay. That's my only other question.
Any other questions at this time from council? Okay.
I have a quick one.
Yeah.
This one permit that did make it through, were they issued a building permit?
They're in the review process. So how it works, and this is actually set forth in the land use code, is once it's deemed complete, then we begin this sort of extensive review process. I don't know that the actual, and Ms. Muhigira might be able to answer that question. I'm so sorry. I always mess up her name. And I apologize. She might be able to answer that question, but I don't know that the permit is actually in hand, so to speak. But I do know that with respect to Ordinance 6, at least, they got in before it was passed, i.e. they got in with a complete, at least from our perspective, a complete building permit application.
So I guess what this is telling me, and I find interesting, is that a planner had their ducks in a row and were able to fit the permit in this window that was created. And it made it through, or is making its way through the process.
It is, and that permit is not before you, so we certainly don't have that record. And I would caution you not to compare sort of apples to apples, because I don't have the specific details of what that application entailed.
Not at all. I'm just focused on the fact that some applications were ready to go and made it through, and some were not.
Ward?
We're dealing with three separate issues, so we're talking 506 Hallam right now?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Bryan, can you please comment on the completeness of the application? There are a number of deficiencies that are listed in the document, structural plans, residential ECU calculators. Could you comment on those?
Yeah, I can. With respect to this, the applicant was in close contact with city staff from before the court order that enjoined Ordinance 27, starting I think on March 4th, and then through March 17th. Constant contact with city staff. This was substantially complete, and in any of those communications, notwithstanding what Ms. Johnson says was available on your website, in all those conversations with staff, there was no indication of a checklist or anything else. This was a substantially complete application, and it was deemed submitted as of March 14th. the day before your second reading at 1:22 PM where you enacted Ordinance 6. So if you look at what state law says, it says that the land use code in effect at the time it's submitted, that's what the state legislature used, not the time it's deemed complete. That's when they say you have to look at that. Now, if you look at your own ordinance says any land use application, Section 3, Ordinance 6, any land use application for development order or notice of approval submitted to the Community Development Department prior to final passage of this ordinance and deemed complete by the Community Development Director. So you didn't put the temporal or time constraint for completeness to be before the moratorium ordinance was enacted. You simply put the time constraint by the time it had to be submitted. Now, why the city council did it that way, we'll have to ask the drafter. But if you look at the canons of statutory construction, which is what judges do, they will look to see that you put the temporal time constraint just as to submission. So it doesn't matter what the deficiencies were, the few nitpicky ones that there were, because your own ordinance says only that the submission has to be prior to the enactment of Ordinance 6. It doesn't say it has to be deemed completed by the Community Development Director before the ordinance is enacted. Okay, so that's a strong legal argument as to why the Community Development Department exceeded the jurisdiction that you gave that department when you voted for Ordinance 6. That's a basis to grant this appeal, is it exceeding jurisdiction. They didn't follow your own ordinance. They read something in and assumed that you might have meant it has to be deemed completed by the time this ordinance is passed. But that's not what you wrote. That's not what you voted on. That's not what we had public hearings about. So they exceeded their jurisdiction there, and they also acted arbitrarily and capriciously by deciding, not legislatively, not by people elected by the voters to decide legislation, they imposed their own. Now, it is interesting to me, the time lag here. We had something submitted on March 15th. Admittedly, as Ms. Johnson says, it's not in dispute. It was timely submitted. The only issue is, was it deemed complete? And for reasons we still don't completely understand, we didn't get an email back. May I call you Bonnie? Thank you. We didn't get an email back from Bonnie until March 30th saying that it's been denied. Now, why it took 15 days to say that it wasn't complete, we know a little bit about because of what's in the record. Staff didn't know what to do with these applications, so they went to the city attorney. That's fair, but the city attorney apparently made the decision to deem these as not timely submitted because they weren't deemed complete by 1:22 p.m. on March 15th. This one and the other two, frankly, are too. These are easy ones, guys. And Ms. Richards, you need to grant this appeal because you're opening yourself up to a lawsuit, and I really don't want to get in more litigation with the city of Aspen. I truly don't. And I think this is an easy way to say, okay, look, the ordinance maybe was not as drafted as tightly as we wanted it to be if we're trying to say that it had to be deemed completed by the time the ordinance went into effect, because that's not what you wrote. And that's not what the ordinance said that you voted on at first reading and then again at second reading. That's not what the ordinance that was posted to the public and in those packets says. If that's what you meant, it should have been drafted in such a way that reflected that. But you can't retroactively expand legislation such as Ordinance 6. That's a very easy solution here. And this is for an interior remodel. And moreover, for this one in particular, my understanding is that Mr. True encouraged this applicant to appeal because this applicant is using an environmentally friendly way of doing this construction that might be of some use to you as you continue to draft legislation pursuant to Ordinance 6. So there are a whole host of reasons, and that's attached in your materials here. There are a whole host of reasons that are laid out in my unfortunately 12-page long brief that say why you have grounds to grant the appeal and overturn the denial written by the Community Development Department, no one's going to be harmed here. There's no other precedent. No one can seize on this precedent because they've missed their appeal deadline. So these 3 appeals are it. And to Mr. Doyle's point, although it is outside the record, my understanding of the one that was approved was deemed submitted back in December. And if I must, and I don't want to belabor the point, but there is, I think, among these applicants, some perception that they could have applied for this anytime in December, January, or early March, but they didn't because Ordinance 27, until a judge said it wasn't, was thought to be in effect. These applicants did have things ready to go. That's why they were able to file and submit so quickly after the judge's injunction order came down. They didn't start it that day. They had everything ready to go. And because that ordinance, which wasn't appealed by the city, I mean, the injunction order enjoining the ordinance, was not appealed, that case law or that decision by the court is the law of the case in this particular matter. Now, again, I don't want to belabor the litigation, which is separate from this. What I am pleading with this council to do is to help us avoid more litigation. This is not going to have any negative impacts on the city or the public. There's going to be no adverse precedent created. All you're doing is saying, yes, the ordinance said it had to be submitted before the ordinance was enacted. There is no dispute that this application was submitted before the ordinance went into effect. Now, deeming something completed, if you wanted to put a time constraint on that, it should have been in Ordinance 6. It wasn't. That is basis enough for you to find that the staff exceeded the jurisdiction, acted arbitrarily and capriciously, and in some ways, to quote Bonnie's email, she herself says there was no opportunity to rectify the missing items. Well, that goes to due process if you're not giving people an opportunity to do something. And this is not staff's fault. This is no one's fault. This is an applicant who timely submitted like the ordinance said they needed to. And so for that reason, we think whatever small materials were missing, which were supplemented and are able to be supplemented or don't apply to this particular project as an interior remodel, then you should find that it's not subject to the moratorium, and if it were, it deserves an exemption as contemplated by this process outlined in Ordinance 6. That, I hope, gets to some of your question, Ward.
Ms. Johnson, Ms. Johnson, could you please comment on Ordinance 6, Section 3, deemed to be complete by Community Development Department Director?
Sure. Well, first, I do want to make a clarification. I was looking at notes from another appeal, since we have 3 of them. I do want to clarify that what was missing from this particular application is the structural plans, a residential ECU calculator, asbestos test, window and door schedules to include U values, and a written full construction management plan, and a wells pre-submission. Wells has to do with environmental, with utilities, water usage, pre-submission checklist. So I did want to make that clarification first for the record. With respect to Councilmember Stein's question, so I want to read the full reference that Mr. Bryan referred to. So you did set forth in Section 3 certain exemptions to Ordinance 6. The first exemption is any land use application for a development order or notice of approval submitted to the Community Development Department prior to final passage of this ordinance and deemed to be complete by the Community Development Department. I think the plain meaning of that is that particular exemption required 2 things. First, that you had to submit the application prior to passage of the ordinance, and then 2, that application had to be deemed complete. Otherwise, I think that by reading it the way that Mr. Bryan has suggested would mean that the last part of that sentence, and deemed complete, has absolutely no meaning. Another way to look at it is you could have submitted anything, and according to Mr. Bryan's argument, you would have held your place for exemption under Ordinance 6. I think that answers your question. I would also note that Section 2, which is the actual moratorium on building permit applications is what it's titled, reads, there is hereby imposed a temporary moratorium on the acceptance by the Community Development Department of any building permit application for all residential uses. So essentially, when Ordinance 6 took effect, this council precluded the Community Development Department from accepting applications after that date. Here, and I will say the land use code supports this, it specifically says that the chief building officer shall not accept partial or incomplete building permit applications. So I think when you read your legislation as a whole, this particular application was and should be subject to Ordinance 6 and precluded by the moratorium.
May I quickly respond to that?
In one moment.
Sure.
Any other questions for me?
No, I'll,
Okay.
wait.
Well, I want to follow up. You listed off the deficiencies. You listed on, you correct, with this case, the deficiencies, it was about 4 or 5 items.
Yeah.
My question is, do the project manager, do they know this list that makes an application complete?
Well, as I said, it's on our website, it's part of our regulations, so I think that they should know. It's out there for anybody to see and to review. This particular application was for a first and second floor addition to the alley facing side of the property. They also wanted to add a new pool on the roof. So the fact that they did not provide structural plans, i.e. any indication of how this roof would be supported or the pool on the roof would be supported, if you read our building code, there are requirements for what a building, if you read our land use code, there are requirements for what a building application has to have. And the purpose of that is so that when we get those applications, we know they have to provide information that shows that the project is compliant with all of our building code regulations. Without showing any structural plans, certainly we could not, it was deemed incomplete because there was no way to assess how this would comply with either the building code or the international building code or the international residential building code.
Thanks.
Ms. Johnson, are you confusing the second application with this one when you talk about swimming pools?
I thought this one was the one where they wanted to add a first and second floor.
Yeah, I think it's 506 is the swimming pool.
I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same one. This is,
Oh, no, this is not. This is actually, I apologize, you're correct. This is the one where they wanted to move the pool. So there was a pool in the basement, and they wanted to move the pool to the exterior. So I apologize for that. But they also wanted to add, I think, extend a subterranean garage, or extend a garage, and include subterranean parking.
That's okay. That's okay, because that's not, what the project is about is not really what we're hearing. So, a question, Mr. Bryan, your clients, Mr. Johnson and Ms. Biel, I believe, they have a project manager, and I think it's Russell Lynch from RAL Design and Management.
yes.
Do you know, did RAL Design and Management, were they aware of the list of items to be submitted for a application that would be deemed complete?
No.
Okay.
They were not made aware of that despite being in constant contact with city staff from early March, before the Ordinance 27 was enjoined, before they submitted. They were in constant contact. That chronology is in your briefs. I learned today that they did not know about this checklist. I did not know about the checklist that Ms. Johnson is talking about until I read her brief on Friday afternoon that was part of your packet. So if that's even part of the record, and I'm not sure it is, that checklist was not made available by staff to our client and to our client's project manager, who has worked diligently with staff, hoping to move this process along and use completely green technologies and techniques to do so. This project manager is used to having to comply with California's very onerous environmental construction code. And so what they have been hoping to do is move forward with this, despite the moratorium, get the moratorium exemption. And it sounds as though some people in your community development department think that there might be something to be learned from this process complying with those provisions. That is set forth in the attachment from Mr. Lynch that I attached to my brief. That, I think, is important because staff knew all along that this project was in the works. This wasn't something that was sprung, a day before it was submitted. This wasn't an example in Ms. Johnson's hypothetical of someone just, tossing something together and submitting it even though it wasn't complete. This was substantially complete. It was missing a couple of things that we didn't know had to be submitted because the planners didn't tell us it needed to be submitted.
But I'm hearing that the list is available. I mean, I'm sure.
Where's it available?
Well,
Where's that in the record?
Mayor, I would note that on page 22 of the record, it says for a list of required docs, click here. So there are links, again, on the Salesforce website. So you go into the Salesforce website to submit these applications. There is a section called Permit Required Documents. And there it says many permit applications require documents, such as site plans or checklists to be included. Upload such documents on this page. Learn more about the required documents on our website. For building and associated permits, C, and then again, it references the city website. So there was, when you've applied for permits, you're notified of the fact that there's several documents that you might need to include.
What you have to click here is not part of the record. There might be something in the record that says click here, but what you get to when you click here is not part of your record, and so therefore I don't think you can consider it. And besides that is, you don't even really have to get to that point because of the way your ordinance is written. The temporal time frame isn't written the way it would be if, as Ms. Johnson hypothesizes, you wanted to make completion required before enactment of Ordinance 6. If that's the way it was supposed to be written, it should have been written that way. It wasn't. And that's the easiest and most direct way that a judge would decide whether that temporal time frame, that adjectival phrase, prior to enactment of Ordinance 6, it's an adjectival phrase. When we look at the rules of English grammar and statutory construction, you look at that qualifying adjectival phrase and you look where it's put in the sentence. Here, it wasn't put after submission and deemed complete. If you wanted to make both of those conditions temporally tied to the enactment of Ordinance 6, you'd put it at the end of the sentence. That's what your 10th grade English teacher would have taught you.
Thank you.
And I would just note, I look at the regulations no different than I look at the ordinance itself. It's the law, it's the legislation before you. So that's my response to that particular.
I appreciate it. All right. Rachel, I've got you up on the screen. Do you have any questions? Mr. Bryan does care to make some comments and have a little bit more. So anything at this time, Rachel?
Thank you. No, I have no questions. I've been listening and have reviewed the documents. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Bryan, you've made a couple of your points already, but if you wanted a couple minutes for any additional comments, I'll allow them now.
Sure, I appreciate that, Mr. Mayor. I think this is a simple issue of looking at how the ordinance was written. It did not say it had to be deemed complete. Even your own staff didn't know what to do with this, which also indicates that it's not nearly as clear as Ms. Johnson might make it sound. If it was that it had to be deemed complete prior to enactment of Ordinance 6, why did it take two very smart city attorneys and a 31-person community development department 15 days to get back to us to deny it? It should have been open and shut, right? Oh, I'm sorry, it's deemed incomplete, denied, same day. That's not the way things went down, though. The way things actually happened, if you look at the record and the timeline and what you have before you in your packet, is you have a staff member telling this applicant, you have submitted, we have accepted it. She even moved it from new submissions into pending completeness review. Those are two separate buckets in the ComDev portal. So the fact that they deemed it submitted, as Ms. Johnson said in her opening remarks, is beyond dispute. No one disputes that it was timely submitted. That can be the end of your inquiry. you can say it was timely submitted prior to the enactment of Ordinance 6, and therefore we are going to grant this exemption. You can do that, and then the completeness part, which is not tied to the chronology of when Ordinance 6 was enacted, is of no moment. And that is a very elegant and easy way to solve this problem.
Thank you. Council? Questions?
Yeah, I do. Chris, you didn't directly answer the question, although you talked about Ward was asking about your evaluation of the completeness of the submission, and you said it's substantially complete, which implicit in that is not complete to me. So are you agreeing that it is not complete?
It was not quote-unquote complete according to what the city later told us needed to be in the submission.
Yeah.
When we got the denial on the 30th.
Okay.
But all materials are available or have been made available since then.
Yeah. And so you've raised that piece, and then you've talked about the sort of pacing of the review. And so, okay, I'm just wondering, we may all really love to see a review process where everything is instantaneously responded to. It's simply not the reality of workflow. And so from a legal perspective, are there requirements or rules about the time to be returned? Is there any record of what was happening during that period?
There's no sort of set standard for what is timely pursuant to the municipal code. I will say that, community development carries a fairly large workload, and so it does take time to do these completeness reviews. I think 2 weeks is standard. I actually think that in most normal circumstances, it might be more than 2 weeks. I can't say that for certain. With respect to the argument that it was basically, they were waiting for city attorney staff, I would say that the record is void of any evidence that the city attorney's office was making the decision of completeness. I do know that there were some discussions and some legal advice was sought by staff. We answer legal questions daily by staff. And staff did seek legal advice with how to communicate maybe some of these decisions. Now, the decision itself was made solely by the chief building official, or in this case, the deputy chief building official. But I don't think, the land use code requires a timely response. I would argue that 2 weeks is not an untimely response. And I certainly would say that Ordinance 6, council did not give applicants the opportunity to supplement if that completeness review was deemed to be, if the result of the completeness review was that the application was incomplete. The ordinance does not call out any exceptions or carve out any exceptions to allow for people to then supplement so long as they met that submission date.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that. And then the last thing I just wanted to follow up on, Chris, is you've kind of made this claim that if city staff did not explicitly lay out in some yet undisclosed manner every specific, that somehow the submittal or the client then is off the hook for that rule. So can you provide some more basis for why you think that's the case?
Well, I think that might be mischaracterizing my position a little bit, Mr. Messero, but let me try to answer the question. There was communication from Bonnie to the applicant, and let me get the times right here, and this is in your record at page 29, that staff changed the status of the application from new application to application completeness review at 4:19 p.m. on March 15th, right? So, and then on March 17th, the owner's representatives exchanged emails with city staff regarding the application, wherein city staff informed them to stand by for additional information, pages 96 and 97. And then it wasn't until 15 days later on March 30th at 8:51 p.m. when Bonnie emailed Jason Aguirre at my client's project manager's office, and only then said that because the items that were missing were uploaded after the date that Ordinance 6 went into effect, we cannot accept them. So they were all submitted before the denial email even came. Is that really so prejudicial? That can't be the intent of the ordinance, to stop applications that are timely submitted and then everything was uploaded after the time, and this is her language on pages 107 to 109 of your record. It says there was not an opportunity to correct deficiencies after the time ordinance went into effect, so items that were uploaded after that time could not be recognized. Well, it doesn't say that in the ordinance. Staff's either getting that direction from on high or from the city attorney or from someone. It took them 15 days to figure out what they were going to say. But they did say that we cannot recognize the things that you've uploaded after 1:22 p.m. on March 15th when Ordinance 6 went into effect. And all I'm saying is that is not what your ordinance says. Your ordinance says it has to be submitted. And we know that it was deemed submitted because staff told us it had been submitted, timely submitted. And as Ms. Johnson says, that's not in debate. That is the silver bullet, so to speak.
So all you're saying is that an incomplete submission was submitted, there was a time lapse, and then additional information following up was submitted, but it was after that deadline, which has not been reviewed or been deemed to be complete in and of itself.
Well, there is no deadline for completeness in Ordinance 6. There is not one. There's a deadline to submit, but there's not a deadline for completeness, the way it's written.
Board, any more?
Well, as I read Ordinance 6 in simple language, it's clear to me that the submission must be complete, and that by your own admission, it was not complete. It was substantially complete. There are a number of areas that were not completed, and those include structural plans for putting a swimming pool on a roof. I think that it's, just based on the information here, that I think it's within the jurisdiction of community development to be dealing with this. I think there was a due process. It was appealed, and now it's here, or it was submitted. It's in front of us. I don't think it was arbitrary or capricious. I find that it's for a layman. In simple English, I understand that the submission needed to be deemed complete to meet the exemption in Section 3 of Ordinance 6. So I don't find grounds to reverse the decision of the Community Development Department.
I do want to clarify something, if I may, and I believe Ms. Johnson and Mr. Bryan above clarified it, but I want to make sure it doesn't change your position. This particular application did not involve a pool.
And actually, I think that's wrong. I do want to re-clarify. So if you look at page 20 of the record, this is for 506 West Hallam. The description given of the work is first floor addition to the alley side of the property, second floor addition for the kitchen expansion, new lighting interior, new staircase, and new pool on roof. So I do believe this is the one that requires the new pool on roof, but Mr. Bryan, you can correct me if you think I have that wrong.
No, I think the way you characterized it might have confused the issue with 800 Roaring Fork, which is next on our agenda.
Right.
If you look at page 2 of RAL Design and Management's May 17th letter that was attached to mine, in the requested changes on page 2, it says the applicant is proposing a spiral staircase to access a rooftop deck with solar panels and a small pool. Part of the proposed rooftop deck will be better insulated roof to help with energy and reduce overall electrical consumption. That is this project.
Right, which requires the pool on the roof.
506, right,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think that speaks to your point of clarification, Mr. True.
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure that's consistent with or does not change.
No, it was my understanding. I read the packet, and it was my understanding that that's what it was.
Yeah, if there's any other comments, any other questions from council members, we can have a motion on this, further discussion. You can express how you feel now or during further discussion, whatever you like. Rachel?
Yes, Mayor Tory, I was going to make a motion to approve resolution number 73 of series of 22 2022, upholding the community development director's opinions. And I'm going to apologize if I'm not stating that quite right. I only have one screen at home, and it's hard to zoom in and have the other screen with the full agenda of this meeting. But I am making that motion to uphold the planning director's opinion on this matter. And I find there's not been denial of due process or any exceeding of jurisdiction or abuse of discretion. And I find that the parsing of the language of the ordinance on the timelines is something that frankly piqued my curiosity in reading the entire packet. But I find that Kate's responses to that are the only really logical ones to me. Because if the meaning of the sentence was stopping right after it has been submitted and doesn't then relate to the and deemed complete, you could submit on a paper napkin and say, this is my application, or you could fill in the first page and put in the name of the lot and say, this is my application, and I'll just wait till later to upload all the other documents that are known and needed when you're developing under the City of Aspen's land use code. I believe that the sentence, as was stated, required two things, not just one thing. And so that's where I would like to uphold the decision, and I have made that motion. Thank you.
Second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Any further comments or discussion at this time?
Yeah, I appreciate you coming in, Chris, and presenting the brief, and thank you, Kate, for all of your work, and Jib and everyone else. To me, when I read that section, it clearly says, and the intent is that we want a complete application. I appreciate the linguistic gymnastics that you're selling to us, and maybe there's a higher legal degree that I don't hold that another judge can at some point, but it just strikes me that your son coming back from the ex-ed trip could read that and understand what the intent is. I have heard and considered your other points, the awareness of the client to the checklist. To me, I could go out to the golf course with my clubs out at the Aspen golf course naked, and I would expect to get arrested even if nobody sent me an email explicitly letting me know that clothes were required, and I just don't see how this is any different. And then lastly, the duration of time. I have sympathy for the client. I think all of us, staff included, would like to see the pace of submissions improve, but no evidence has been provided that that was anything other than the normal pace of business and withheld for any other reason. So I appreciate all those arguments. I just can't find any of those worth overturning in what I read as the intent of that statement. And to Rachel's point, while you've said it's not precedential in any way, we have laws and we have a timeline for a reason. And if something isn't submitted fully, who's to say what partial is okay? And if all we need to do is just say, oh, I've submitted to get something in, well, that's a loophole that you could drive a Mack truck through. So I'm supportive of this.
Thanks. Do you want to make a comment, John?
Yeah, I just want to say
I want it to be read.
I have friends that work in ComDev, and I have friends that work in the development community, and I think that both groups of people know what happens when you show up with an incomplete building permit. Thanks.
Thank you.
I would just like for Resolution 73 Series of 2022 to be read, the one that Rachel moved and Skippy seconded. For the record, there were two ordinance 73s, one to affirm, one to deny. And so I think the one that Rachel is referring to reads, a resolution of the Aspen City Council affirming the decision of the Community Development Director to deny an exemption from Ordinance 6, Series 2022 for the proposed development at 506 West Hallam Street, Aspen, Colorado. So that's what we're voting on.
Thank you for that, Ward.
Thank you. Yeah, a few comments for you. I appreciate what you brought to us. I think you do a great job at what you do. I don't read that statement the same as well. I don't know about your temporally placed adjectives, but when I read that, to me, it says, and deemed complete. So for me, I read that adjective as temporarily placing that because of an and statement.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
So the way that it's written, it says, and deemed to be completed by the Community Development Department Director. Does that mean that he had to deem it complete under your reading before the enactment of Ordinance 6? Or just that the application had to be complete before the enactment?
I'd say
Can
both.
I?
It's possibly both. And for me, what is necessary is a completed application, right?
But that's not what it says. The ordinance says deemed to be complete. So if we're going to be literal here, it says.
But it doesn't say it has to be deemed complete at submittal. It's deemed complete in process, right?
Exactly my point. That's my whole argument.
No, it has to be complete at submittal, but that would get approved and deemed. So for me, I disagree with what you're saying. And I understand, I totally get what you're saying, but no, the intention there is for a completed application. I'll give you another example. This application was actually missing pieces, right? So there are applications that may come through that are complete and not perfected. Those are not deemed complete. You understand? You can have all your pieces, but if they are not perfected, it is not deemed complete.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, because I've got to explain this to my client after this meeting.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So if I understand the consensus of this city council is that they're reading this provision of section 3 of ordinance 6 to say that the land use application has to be submitted to ComDev prior to final passage of this ordinance, ordinance 6, and not only has to be complete, but also be deemed complete by the ComDev director before final passage of this ordinance. Is that, am I understanding?
I don't believe that's what the intent is. I think what the intent is that the application has to be deemed complete. It has to be submitted and deemed complete. When you submit something, it takes a while to review it. You yourself said that the status had changed to pending completion or analysis.
Completeness review, right.
Okay, so you yourself admitted that it had changed, was accepted, and it was being reviewed, and upon review, it was found to be incomplete.
Well, and I would just add to that, I think that, yes, it has to be submitted prior to passage of the ordinance, so it had to be actually in the system. But if what is in the system is not complete, you don't meet the second requirement. And if you haven't met the second requirement, if you haven't submitted the documents before Ordinance 6 passed, then those documents cannot be considered.
Okay.
As part of that completeness review.
And that's fine.
Does that make sense?
I'm not here to argue with, I mean, I am a little bit, but I want to agreeably disagree. We can do that. We share a lot of the same goals and larger policy objectives. We disagree on some of the minutia here, but I just want to be able to understand, the record itself from your own staff says we cannot recognize the items that were uploaded after Ordinance 6 went into effect. That we will not recognize them. That's at 107 to 109 of the record. And I'm going to have to explain to my client and then possibly a district court judge that it's this council's interpretation of its own ordinance that 3 things had to happen before Ordinance 6 went into effect. It had to be timely submitted, the application had to be complete, and then it also had to be deemed complete by ComDev director.
That's not.
That's incorrect. I don't think anyone has said that.
Okay, then please crystallize it so we have a clear
don't.
record here.
The record, I believe, is complete at this point.
Yep.
This is argument that is not necessary. I think it's clear there's a motion on the table. It's up to council as to how they wish to proceed.
And do me a favor, Mr. Bryan, if you are to pursue this further, please also include whether or not the project manager knew or did not know whether he was submitting a completed application or not.
He believed he was submitting a complete application.
Okay, well, you can carry that to the next one.
Yes, but I'm confined to this record, so here we are.
I appreciate that.
Call the question.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Can we have a roll call vote for is 73? Resolution 73,
Counselor Doyle,
upholding
Yes.
community director.
Counselor Howenstein,
Yes.
Counselor Mesereau, Counselor Richards,
Yes,
Mayor Tory.
Yes. All right, let's get to next item.
The next item is KDR Trust. Again, Ms. Johnson will address this for the city.
Mayor Tory, can we take just a 2-minute restroom break here before we go into another long one?
Yes, you may.
Okay, thank you.
We'll take a 2-minute recess.
Turn your camera off, please.
Yeah, good idea.
Jim, can I have a word?
Welcome back. We are back to our special meeting that's scheduled for May 17, 2022, and we are on to item number 2, and the city attorney will introduce this.
This involves KDR Trust for Lot B, Aspen Company subdivision, also known as 800 Roaring Fork Road. KDR Trust is represented by Mr. Bryan. City's position will be presented by Ms. Johnson. My understanding is this is substantially similar to the last discussion. There are 2 resolutions in the packet, Resolution 74, both designated as Resolution 74. One affirms the decision of the Community Development Director, the other reverses. The Community Development Director did deem the applications incomplete. You may seek comments from either Ms. Johnson or Mr. Bryan at this point, if you wish specifics.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Johnson, will you introduce this for us?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Mayor, this is an appeal of, again, the Community Development Department's decision to reject a building permit application for property at 800 Roaring Fork Road. The reasons that this particular building application was rejected was because it was deemed incomplete.
Hey, Kate, can you get closer to the mic? I can't hear you as well.
Sorry, I did think I had my mic off.
Your voice is different.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Sorry, thank you. The reasons this particular application was deemed incomplete are that it was missing residential design standard approvals. That's a land use review process. And because they didn't have, generally the land use review process goes before the building permit process. And I will say in our regulations, it does say that you shall include all land use review approvals as part of your building permit application that are necessary. It did not have an ECU calculator. Again, this relates to your water usage for the particular project. It did not have landscape plans. It did not have a Class A roof assembly. That actually is a requirement that, as I noted in my brief, is required by a specific ordinance adopted by this council several years ago. It did not have structural verification for the wall demo. So again, the proposed plans included demolition of walls, but there were no sort of engineering plans or structural plans that would demonstrate the stability of that work. There were no asbestos tests, and again, this was based upon the plans submitted seemed to be required. There was no special inspection agreement. It was missing U-value information that relates to the windows and doors and the compliance with the energy code. And then there were no shoring plans for some of the work that would have to be done to the exterior of the structure. Again, the project itself was a new remodel and addition, a new basement renovation, including construction of a new garage with partial subterranean parking. That gets to some of that shoring plan question. New master bedroom over the garage extension, relocation of a basement pool to the basement pool to the exterior to an exterior pool. New roof, windows and doors, new lighting and new landscaping were what the builder presented in the building permit application is what this project would entail. Those are his words, not mine. For the same reasons, and I would incorporate my arguments from the last hearing. This application was denied, and the Community Development Department found it to be subject to Ordinance 6 Series of 2022 because, again, what was submitted was not complete, and the ordinance took effect, therefore precluding the supplementation with additional documents that would be necessary to complete that application. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we are asking that you uphold the decision in this case as well.
Thank you. My first question, is this the same project management and project representative company as the last application?
Yes. And I would point in further to that question, Mr. Mayor, I would point you to page 3 of my brief, and then quoting the record at page 160 to 161, where upon receiving Bonnie's email notifying them of the denial at This one was late on the evening on March 30th. The very next day, the owner's representatives followed up with an email to Bonnie stating, "It is my understanding we can work through the plan sets that you call incomplete. We understand that we met our burden with submitting our proposed plans as we were instructed. We understand this process is out of the standard process and seems to be no clear rule book to follow. We submitted on time for our process to continue according to laws in place at the time of submittal." The owner's representatives received no response to that email. So yes, it's the same property management company that had been in touch with staff daily from March 4th through March 17th. And then we didn't hear back until March 30th when Bonnie apparently got some kind of direction and emailed the project manager and said that your permit application has been denied and there is no opportunity to correct any deficiencies. So any items uploaded after the ordinance went into effect cannot be recognized.
Do you know, are these the first projects that this company has worked on in Aspen?
I can't speak to that, and that's not on the record.
Okay. All right. Questions to start?
Actually, you just asked one I was going to, was, has this contractor, planner had projects come before ComDev before?
That's outside
Not in the record.
That's outside the record, so.
Fair enough.
If you're going to consider that as part of your decision, have at it, but you're not supposed to.
Fair enough.
Not at all. I'm just trying to get information. Ward?
Well, I think substantially the same arguments. The reading of ordinance, of Section 3, Ordinance 6, I think is important. I think we established how this board, how this council interprets that. I think that the completeness of the application was, it was deemed incomplete. And it's not the duty of the Community Development Department to hold the hands of the applicant and make sure that they understand they're grown men and women, and it's their responsibility to submit an application that is complete at the time of, before the time of effect of Ordinance 6, 2022. So my inclination unless I have been convinced otherwise, is that I will be upholding the Resolution 74 to uphold the decision of the ComDev department.
Well, and I hereby incorporate all of my arguments made with respect to this appeal concerning 800 Roaring Fork Road as those that I stated with respect to 506 West Hallam, just as Ms. Johnson did in connection with her cross application and incorporation.
Understood, thank you. And assumed.
Just one question, Chris, which is Kate had read a variety of things that were deemed incomplete. Do you have any evidence to demonstrate that that was incorrect and that they were complete at that time?
Well, we didn't get a response to what was incomplete until 15 days later.
Understood, but you are agreeing that what was submitted previously 15 days earlier was incomplete at that time?
I'm not agreeing to that.
Okay.
I'm not agreeing to that. I am relying on what the record says at pages 160 to 161, where the land use planner said, "We understand that our burden with submitting our proposed plans, and we did so as we were instructed." So if staff is telling applicants one thing, it's not hand-holding. That's the way it works in ComDev. You know that with your friends in ComDev. They work daily with these people. They help them. They want to help applicants comply. But if they're instructing an applicant on what needs to be complied, or what needs to be submitted for compliance, and then 15 days later, after we haven't heard from them for 2 weeks, then come back and give us a list of things that weren't there, why wasn't that stated earlier? And the fact that this applicant submitted things that they were told and instructed by staff to do creates an estoppel issue. That's another reason that the application, that the appeal should be granted and this application should be exempted. And then we still don't know why the owner's representatives received no response after that March 31st email. I don't know if they were instructed to do that by the ComDev director or the city attorney's office. We might find that out in later proceedings, but there is no indication of why the owner's representatives weren't given the courtesy of a response.
Yeah, I appreciate all that, and I'm not hearing that there's any additional evidence to suggest that what is deemed incomplete was in fact incomplete when submitted at that time. I'll take that as yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, was that a question?
Yeah. I'm just saying, I'm not hearing you say that the list of things that were deemed incomplete at the time of submittal were in fact complete at that time. You're making other arguments about the pace of response, et cetera, but you're not suggesting that that is an incorrect list of things.
I don't know if those things were in there or not, or if they were even required to be there. I do know that according to the record, everything that was submitted was as they were instructed by staff. Now, I will also say that there still seems to be some confusion among this board as to how it's reading Section 3 of Ordinance 6. If it's saying that you have to timely submit before Ordinance 6 went into effect, A. B, it has to be complete before Ordinance 6 went into effect. And C, it has to be actually deemed complete by ComDev before Ordinance 6 went into effect. That should have been in the ordinance, but that's not the way the ordinance is written.
That is not what council is interpreting, or how council is interpreting. He's misstating the statements of council.
I said if. I said
That-
if that's how you're reading it.
Well, they are reading it as they have expressed previously, as it is written, and I would request council not put words into their mouth.
Oh, and that's fair, Mr. True. I will not put words in the mouth of this council. I still need some kind of clarity, though, from somebody as to what it would take to comply with this Section 3. Would all three of those things need to be necessary? You have to timely submit before Ordinance 6 goes into effect. It has to actually, in fact, be complete before Ordinance 6 goes into effect. And then 3, it has to be deemed complete before Ordinance 6 goes into effect.
That is not
If somebody had done those things, would they have been able to have this application?
I think the submitted application needs to be subsequently deemed complete. That it is submitted and it has to be, as it's submitted, it needs to be complete, but it's not deemed that way at the moment. It takes a while to look at the submission, and it was deemed incomplete for the list of reasons that was listed in the staff's response. That's my reading of it.
Rachel, questions?
No, I don't really have a question, Tori. I don't know if you're ready for a motion.
Anything, John? No? I would take a motion.
I would make a motion to approve the version of resolution number 74, affirming the planning director's, ComDev director's decision in this matter. I find there has not been a denial of due process. There has not been a abuse of discretion or exceeding jurisdiction. I think that the language is quite clear, and I think that the processes are usually quite clear as well. And I will leave it at that and see if there's a second.
I'll second that.
And if there's anything I would add in my comments is that clearly this 800 Roaring Fork Road application, the submission was missing a number of components.
Thank you.
I second it, and I'll add my comments that I also feel that it is within the jurisdiction of the Community Development Department to review this. I think due process was followed. There was a review of the application. I do not think it was arbitrary or capricious, and I base my decision solely on the information presented in the application for by Councilor Bryan.
Thank you. With a motion and a second, any further discussion?
I would just say for the record that my reasoning on this issue is the same as the last, having the same responses from the attorney that this was also incomplete.
Can we have a roll call vote?
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein,
Yes?
Counselor Mesereau,
Yes.
Counselor Richards,
Yes,
Mayor Tory.
Yes. All right, let's get to third item, please.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, real quick, and I'll let the parties explain this further, but this is involving 308 North First LLC, also known as 308 North First Street, Aspen, Colorado. Oh, it's also known as 134 West Hallam Street. The owner is 308 North First Street.
Jim, you're not speaking into your mic.
Sorry. Just for the record, this next appeal involves the owner of property known as 308 North First LLC for Lot 1 Nolan lot split. It's also known as 308 North First Street, Aspen, Colorado, and also known as 134 West Hallam Street, Aspen, Colorado. And I'll turn it over to the attorneys for the two parties.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. This application, again, is a appeal, or it's before you on an appeal of the Community Development Director's decision to deny an exemption to Ordinance 6 for the building permit application submitted by 308 North First LLC for development of property at 308 North First Street here in the city of Aspen. This is a project where it is a vacant lot, and they seek to build a new house. So it is not a remodel or an addition to any existing structure. It's the construction of a new home. We did receive an application. This application, because it's a new home, was quite lengthy, but it was missing some things. It was missing specifically a WELS checklist submitted but not signed. So the checklist was submitted, it just didn't have a signature on it. They did not provide a COVID safety plan. That's a requirement that was put in place to ensure that these projects and the people working at these projects have adequate COVID safety procedures in place. I would note that the brief submitted by Mr. Bryan does suggest that that is no longer a requirement. However, it is still a requirement for all building permit applications. It did not include fireplace installation instructions, a fireplace registration form. Again, that's a form that you can find on our website. An exterior lighting cut sheet, and information about the hot tub, and then the Class A roof assembly. That Class A, we do require any sort of roof construction to meet with a Class A roof assembly. That is a specific ordinance that put that requirement in place, and it's usually, they have to submit some reports and then show that their plans comply with those roof reports. Again, my understanding is that Mr. Bryan has asserted somewhat of a different argument that has to relate to the interpretation and construction of Ordinance 6 series of 2022, and that relates specifically to how this ordinance applies to basically new structures. So if you look at section 2 and 3 of the ordinance, section 2 places a temporary moratorium on the acceptance by the Community Development Department of any building permit application for all residential uses and development as defined in the Land Use Code in all zone districts within the city that meet the demolition or would have the effect of increasing the height, gross square footage, net livable, leasable area, or net livable area of any building. The assertion here is that because there is no building on this property, that this particular application is exempt from Ordinance 6. As set forth in my brief, I think the intent of this ordinance was to apply to any development that would increase residential square footage, whether that be a new or existing building. And essentially going from 0 to any square footage is an increase in square footage of any structure. I don't know how much information or if you have questions on this particular issue, but I did want to take a moment to address it. With respect to the other arguments, I think they're substantially similar to what you've heard on the other two applications. And again, I want to incorporate my prior arguments on those issues. So thank you. And again, we would ask you to uphold the Community Development Department's decision in this particular case.
Thank you. Are there any questions at this time from council? I think Mr. Bryan might want an opportunity to address this one.
Thank you.
Go right ahead.
This one is different. This was a application that was submitted on March 16th. No, I'm sorry, March 14th.
Yeah.
At 6:04 PM. This is by someone that you know well, Chris Benden of Benden Adams. He used to be your Community Development Department Director. He's a well-known land planner here in town. He submitted the application number 22-0662 to construct a single-family home on the property, which is a vacant lot, as shown in the record. 2 days later, on March 16th, 11:59 a.m., the building department provided notice to owners' reps that there were items allegedly missing. The COVID safety plan, the fireplace specs, the things that are listed, that a hot tub cover cut sheet, which I don't believe exists actually, but those were the things among the list that Ms. Johnson said that they were missing. Upon learning of those missing items at 11:59 a.m., by 4:49 p.m. the same day, this is in page 53 of your record, the owner's representatives had submitted everything that existed to satisfy the completeness review. And that's when Bonnie emailed Mr. Benden 2 days later, March 18th, 12:04 p.m., and said, "Thank you for your patience with us this week. We are currently waiting on answers from the city attorney on how to process the applications that came in between the district court ruling and the passing of Ordinance 6, 2022. As soon as I have answers, I will let you know." Nobody said that it was incomplete or that we were out of time to submit. No one said that from staff. Owner received no information from the building department until 12 days later, March 30th at 4:50 p.m., when Bonnie at the city emailed Mr. Benden and said, "Your permit application for 134 West Hallam Street, also known as 308 North First Street, has been rejected because it was incomplete at the time Ordinance 6, 2022 went into effect at 1:22 p.m. on March 15th. There was not an opportunity to correct any deficiencies after the time Ordinance 6 went into effect, so items that you uploaded after that time could not be recognized." That's from page 5 of your record. And yes, the same arguments do apply, and so I would incorporate by reference and cross-apply the ones that we heard from the previous two appeals at this special meeting here as to the textual meaning and plain language of your Ordinance 6, Section 3 in particular, about the temporal scope. And the other arguments that we've made. In addition, Ms. Johnson does correctly anticipate the other argument, which says this is not what the moratorium was intended to go after. This was not a scrape and replace. This was a vacant lot that the planning had been in the works for months, if not years, with architects, engineers, land use planners, attorneys, and they couldn't apply because of Ordinance 27, which was later deemed to be unlawful, and then applied as quickly as they could. And then as quickly as they were told that there was something that was deficient or incomplete, they cured that within 5 hours. So I believe this one, and the others, frankly, but this one in particular should be allowed to go through, and it should be granted, and you should grant the appeal and reverse the Community Development Department decision. No one's going to be harmed by allowing this project to go forward through the planning phase and to get the application deemed complete. No one's harmed. People will be harmed if we have to wait for the moratorium, which now is going to end, we think, August 8th. You've told us that. But that could be extended too, as you know. You've already had to do it once. This project would like to go forward. Everything's in order. Everything is complete now. And we see no reason why this should be held up, and we would ask that this council grant this appeal and let this project go forward.
Thank you. Start with questions.
Yeah.
Ms. Johnson, could you address the issues of curing the submittal?
I will confirm it was cured the next day. So it was cured on March 16th. They submitted those missing documents with respect to the fireplace installation. They submitted a signed wells checklist. They submitted a registration form for the fireplace, information about the hot tub, and the Class A roof assembly documents. So those were submitted very shortly after passage of Ordinance 6. Technically, I think Ordinance 6 speaks for itself, and I think there was a hard and fast deadline, and to sort of recognize an ability to supplement would be, I think, outside of the plain meaning of the ordinance. Certainly, it's within your discretion here today, but there was no such exception carved out in this ordinance. Like, if all you had to do, if you could supplement within 24 hours, you were okay. I don't know how that would have impacted other people in a similar position. We just don't know. And so I think, have I answered your question?
Yeah, I think so. To the question that you brought up on section 2, I believe that this does apply to new construction, that it does increase the height, gross square footage, net leasable or net livable area of any building. I think the intent of the Ordinance 6 is that means new construction or increasing of an existing structure. So I find that this does apply to this application. As to the timing on the curing, it is a little bit different animal here. I'd like to hear what the rest of the council has to say about that.
Rachel?
Yeah, thank you, Tori. There's a lot of red lines in this life and a lot of deadlines. You need a certain postmark for your tax application or your extension application. And, if you forget to sign your form that you send in when you made that extension request, I don't know that it's accepted. And I have kind of thought I might have had those lucky numbers for the lottery, but if I get down there at 7:01 p.m., the machine won't spit out the one for the drawing I want to be in. And so I see this as something that our ordinance did not have an outside ability to supplement or to augment after the initial deadline. And I think that yes, this appears a little different because they were able to bring in completed documents after the deadline. But the same argument holds, I believe, that was applicable to the prior cases of whether it was a complete application when it came in the door and not was it something that could be completed later. Because if we go back to that standard, the question really does remain, how little would you have to submit to then want to supplement it later, whether it's 5 hours later or 2 days later or 5 days later. And some of that, as I read the record, was submitted the next day, the 16th, not the 15th, was the date marks on some of those additional submittals to correct that packet. So no, it doesn't really create a different light or dynamic in this case, in my impression. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. John?
Yeah, this case is slightly different for me because the applicants employed Ben and Adams, who both used to work for the city, and I think when they worked for the city, they were also aware of deadlines that were necessary for building permits to be accepted. So that said, I think this is an easier decision for me to make. in that, I think the planners knew there was a deadline and weren't prepared. And it also suggests that the quick turnaround with the stuff that was lacking was just something they were waiting for that they didn't have at their disposal when the application was due.
Thanks. Skippy? Any conversation here?
Yeah, it does feel a bit different with the timeline. But the logic behind the arguments is really the same, unless on the other argument that I am to find that these ordinances are not intended to apply to new construction, which certainly not my intent when doing this, and I think evidenced by the fact that this project was waiting for this moment. So it hadn't moved forward previously because this was the intent of these rules. So unless Chris, unless you have any additional information outside of your brief or what's been discussed, though I would like to feel my way into a different decision. Logically, I can't get there.
Well, to speak to that, Mr. Messero, you know, what you're being presented with is a straw man argument here. You're hearing these hypotheticals that don't exist in factual reality, that someone could write something down on a napkin and submit it, and that would be deemed submitted, and then they'd have to go complete it later. That's not the reality on the ground. That's a straw man argument. What you've seen here is 3 applications that were 99% complete. This one that we're talking about right now, 308 North First Street, was missing a handful of items, some of which don't even exist, and we weren't told that until 11:59 a.m. on the 16th, and then it was cured 4 hours later, less than 5 hours later. So, you know, and if you want to bring in Mr. Benden's former service at the city, you know, he predated Ms. Garrow and he predated Mr. Sapino as the ComDev director. It was common practice for this community development department to treat something as submitted, and then there was a completeness review, but that did not bar the submission date. And that's mentioned as well in this. It was common practice in community development for them to do a completeness review and tell the applicant, hey, you're missing a COVID safety plan. Hey, you're missing a hot tub cover spec sheet. Hey, you didn't sign this this checklist that you filled out. I mean, that's ticky-tack, guys. And you're gonna hold up someone's application where they've spent a whole lot of time and money and effort because they got you the documents at 4:49 p.m. on March 16th on an emergency ordinance that you rushed through after a court enjoined your previous one? That's what you're gonna do here. I think you shouldn't do it. I think you should find that there's adequate grounds to reverse this decision for 308 North First Street. I hope you do.
Mr. Bryan, I find this to be somewhat in the lines, and I don't mean to make light of this, but that it's a near miss, that not getting hit by that RAFTA bus is a near miss. And this is, it just missed the completion, the curing by a few hours or by a day, but it did miss it. So I feel that it falls in the category that those items listed as incomplete, although it was noticed more quickly than some of the other ones, 15 days sooner or 14 days sooner than the other 2 applications, that this was noticed on March 16th. March 16th was after the adoption of Ordinance 6. So although it's a near miss, I think it is a near miss, or it is a miss.
For the record, I cross-apply and incorporate everything I've said from the previous arguments.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Your Honor, I move adoption of Resolution 75, Series 2022, affirming a decision of the Community Development Director to deny an exemption from Ordinance 6, Series 2022 for a proposed development at 208 North First Street, Aspen, Colorado.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further comments or? Yes, Rachel?
Yeah, thank you. I support the motion. Thank you, Ward, for making that. I would just add that there were several items missing from the submission on deadline, that I do not believe there has been a denial of due process, or that the administrative body has exceeded its jurisdiction, or that it has abused its discretion in its findings that we are upholding. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein,
Yes.
Counselor Mesereau,
Yes.
Counselor Richards,
Yes,
Mayor Tory.
Yes. Thank you.
thank you all.
Thank you.
Nothing further.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Could
I
have a
move we
motion
adjourn.
To adjourn
Thank
this
you.
council meeting here?
Second.
We have a motion and a second for adjournment. Any further discussion?
Chinese food?
And could we have a roll call vote for adjournment, please?
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein,
Yes.
Counselor Mesereau.
Yep.
Counselor Richards,
Yes,
Mayor Tory.
Yes.
thank you all.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks, grassroots.
Thanks, Rachel.
Have a good night.